The tragedy that still haunts me? My little brother took the blame for a crime I committed, and died in a juvenile center months later. There are some memories that carve themselves so deeply into your soul that they become part of your DNA, passed down through your bloodstream like a hereditary disease. For me, that memory is the night of March 15, 2019, when I made a choice that would destroy 2 lives and haunt me for the rest of mine. I was 17, angry at the world, and convinced that life had dealt me an unfair hand. My little brother Marcus was 14, still innocent enough to believe that I was someone worth looking up to. We lived in a cramped apartment in North Philadelphia with our mom, who worked 2 jobs just to keep us fed and housed. Dad had left when Marcus was 8, taking with him any semblance of stability our family had managed to maintain. "You're the man of the house now," Mom had told me after Dad disappeared, but I'd never wanted that responsibility. I wanted to be a normal teenager, not a surrogate father to my little brother and a source of support for my exhausted mother. Instead, I found myself growing angrier with each passing month, resentful of the burdens I hadn't asked for and bitter about the opportunities I felt were being denied to me. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed to handle our circumstances with a maturity that made me feel even worse about my own attitude. He never complained about wearing second-hand clothes or eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. He helped Mom with household chores without being asked, maintained good grades despite having no quiet space to study, and somehow managed to stay optimistic about our future. "Things will get better, Tyler," he'd tell me when I was particularly moody about our situation. "Mom's working toward that promotion, and you're going to graduate soon. Everything's going to work out." His faith in our family's ability to overcome our struggles only made me feel more guilty about my own negative attitude, which in turn made me even angrier. It was a vicious cycle that I couldn't seem to break, and it was leading me toward increasingly poor decisions. I'd started hanging around with a group of older kids who dealt drugs in our neighborhood, not because I was interested in selling but because they represented a kind of freedom and power that felt appealing. They had money, respect, and the ability to take what they wanted without asking permission. When you're 17 and feel powerless in every aspect of your life, that kind of autonomy looks like salvation. "You're better than those guys," Marcus would say when he saw me with them. "You're smart, Tyler. You could go to college, get out of here. Why are you wasting time with people who are just going to drag you down? You don't understand anything." I'd snap back, frustrated by his refusal to see how limited our options really were. "College costs money we don't have. Getting out of here takes opportunities that people like us don't get. Those guys understand reality." But Marcus was right, and deep down I knew it. The guys I was hanging around with weren't offering me real opportunities. They were offering me temporary escape from the responsibilities and frustrations that defined my daily life. And that escape was about to cost me everything. The night everything went wrong started innocuously enough. I was walking home from basketball practice when I ran into Derek Wilson, one of the older guys I'd been spending time with. He was agitated, pacing back and forth on the corner near our apartment building, clearly upset about something. "Tyler, perfect timing," he said when he saw me. "I need a favor, and it could be worth some serious cash for you." Derek explained that he'd arranged to sell a significant amount of drugs to a buyer across town, but the police had been watching his usual spots and he was worried about being followed. He needed someone clean, someone who wouldn't attract attention, to make the delivery for him. "It's easy money," he insisted. "Just drive to the address, hand over the package, collect the cash, and come back. $500 for 2 hours of work." $500 was more money than I'd ever had at one time. It was enough to help Mom with rent, to buy Marcus new clothes for school, to maybe even save a little for the future. I knew it was dangerous, knew it was illegal, knew it was exactly the kind of decision that could ruin my life. But I was 17 and desperate and convinced that I could handle anything. "I don't have a car," I pointed out. "Take your mom's," Derek replied. "She's at work, right? Just borrow it for a couple hours. What she doesn't know won't hurt her." My mother's car was a 15-year-old Honda Civic that she used to get to her cleaning jobs across the city. Taking it without permission felt like a betrayal, but the promise of $500 overrode my guilt. I convinced myself that I was doing this for my family, that the risk was worth the potential reward. What I didn't anticipate was Marcus being awake when I tried to sneak out with Mom's keys. "Where are you going?" he asked, standing in the hallway in his pajamas, looking younger than his 14 years. "Just out for a drive," I said, trying to sound casual. "Can't sleep, Tyler, you don't have a license. And Mom's going to kill you if she finds out you took her car." "She's not going to find out because I'll be back before her shift ends." Go back to bed, Marcus. But Marcus wasn't that easily dismissed. He'd always been perceptive, able to read people's emotions and motivations with an accuracy that was sometimes uncomfortable. He could tell that something was wrong, that this wasn't just a late-night joyride. "This is about those guys you've been hanging around with, isn't it?" he said. "Tyler, whatever they're asking you to do, it's not worth it. Nothing good ever comes from getting involved with people like that." "You don't know what you're talking about," I replied, but even as I said it, I could feel the truth of his words. "I can handle myself." "Then let me come with you." The suggestion caught me completely off guard. "What? No, absolutely not. If it's really no big deal, if you're really just going for a drive, then it shouldn't matter if I come along. But if it's something dangerous, then you shouldn't be doing it either." Marcus had always been like that, logical, protective, willing to put himself at risk to keep me from making bad decisions. It was one of the things I loved most about him and one of the things that frustrated me most about our relationship. He saw the best in me even when I couldn't see it in myself. "Go back to bed," I said firmly. "This doesn't concern you." "Everything you do concerns me," he replied. "We're family. Your problems are my problems." I should have listened to him. I should have put Mom's keys back, gone to bed, and found another way to help our family financially. Instead, I let my pride and desperation override my better judgment. "Fine," I said, "but you stay in the car, you don't ask questions, and you never tell Mom about this. Deal?" "Deal," Marcus agreed, though I could see the worry in his eyes. The drive across town was tense and quiet. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at me like he was trying to figure out what we were really doing, but he kept his word about not asking questions. I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine, that this was just a simple transaction that would be over quickly. The address Derek had given me led to a rundown house in a neighborhood that looked even rougher than ours. I parked across the street and told Marcus to wait in the car while I handled the business. He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes as he took in our surroundings. "Tyler," he said as I was getting out of the car, "if something goes wrong, just run. Don't worry about me, don't worry about the car, just get out of there." "Nothing's going to go wrong," I assured him, though I was feeling increasingly uneasy about the whole situation. The drug transaction itself went smoothly. I knocked on the door, handed over Derek's package to a man who barely looked at me, collected the cash, and walked back toward the car. For a brief moment, I felt relieved and even proud of myself. I'd successfully completed my first real criminal enterprise, and I was $500 richer for it. Then I heard the sirens. 2 police cars appeared at the end of the street, moving fast in our direction. Panic flooded through my system as I realized that the transaction I'd just completed had been some kind of setup or surveillance operation. I ran toward Mom's car, my only thought being to get Marcus out of there before the police could connect us to what had just happened. But I was too late. The police cars screeched to a stop in front of the Honda, blocking our escape route. Officers jumped out with their weapons drawn, shouting commands that I could barely process through my terror and adrenaline. "Get out of the vehicle. Hands where we can see them." I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching as Marcus slowly raised his hands and climbed out of the driver's seat. The driver's seat. At some point during the transaction, he'd moved from the passenger side to behind the wheel, and now the police were treating him as the primary suspect. "That's not the driver," I shouted, finally finding my voice. He wasn't driving, I was, but the chaos of the arrest made it impossible for anyone to hear or process my protests. Marcus was being handcuffed, the car was being searched, and officers were asking him questions about drugs, money, and criminal associates. Through it all, my little brother remained calm and compliant, answering their questions with "yes sir" and "no sir" like he'd been taught. "Marcus, tell them you weren't driving," I yelled as they put him in the back of a police car. "Tell them it was me." But Marcus just looked at me through the window with an expression I'll never forget, calm, resigned, and somehow protective. Even as he was being arrested for my crime, he was still trying to take care of me. I was arrested too, of course, but as a passenger rather than the primary suspect. The police found the drug money in my pocket, but Marcus's position in the driver's seat made him appear to be the one in charge of the operation. When they asked who was responsible for the drugs, Marcus looked directly at me and said, "It was my idea. Tyler didn't know anything about it." "Marcus, no," I protested. "That's not true. Tell them the truth." But my little brother had made his decision. He was taking the blame for my crime, protecting me from the consequences of my own bad choices, sacrificing his future to preserve mine. The juvenile justice system moved quickly after that. Marcus was charged with drug trafficking and possession with intent to distribute, serious felonies that carried significant penalties even for a 14-year-old. I was charged as an accessory, but Marcus's insistence that he was the mastermind and I was an unwilling participant meant that my charges were much less severe. Why did you lie? I asked him during one of our brief conversations before his sentencing. Why didn't you tell them it was my idea? Because you have a future, he replied simply. You're smart enough to go to college, to get out of this neighborhood, to make something of yourself. I'm not going to let one mistake ruin all of that. That's not your choice to make, I said, though even as I said it, I knew it was too late to change anything. Yes, it is, Marcus replied. You're my big brother. Taking care of you is my job too. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile detention facility 2 hours outside of Philadelphia. The judge noted his young age and lack of prior criminal history as mitigating factors, but the seriousness of the charges meant that significant time was unavoidable. I was sentenced to 6 months of probation and community service, a slap on the wrist that felt like a mockery given what Marcus was facing. Use this opportunity, the judge told me during sentencing. Your brother has given you a second chance. Don't waste it. But how could I focus on my future when my little brother was locked up for my crime? How could I move forward knowing that Marcus was paying the price for my stupidity and selfishness? The juvenile detention center where Marcus was sent was supposed to be one of the better facilities in the state, focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment. It had educational programs, counseling services, and a reputation for helping young offenders turn their lives around. But from the beginning, it was clear that Marcus was struggling to adapt to the environment. He's too soft for this place, Mom said after our first visit. He doesn't know how to be hard, how to protect himself from the other kids. She was right. Marcus had always been gentle, empathetic, the kind of person who saw the best in everyone even when they didn't deserve it. In our neighborhood, those qualities had made him beloved by teachers, neighbors, and family friends. In juvenile detention, they made him a target. The phone calls from Marcus during his first month were heartbreaking. He tried to sound upbeat and positive, asking about my school, Mom's jobs, and whether I was staying out of trouble. But I could hear the fear and loneliness in his voice, the way he was struggling to maintain his optimism in an environment that seemed designed to crush it. I'm making friends, he would say, though it sounded forced. The teachers here are nice. The food isn't too bad. Marcus, you don't have to pretend with me, I told him during one call. If something's wrong, you can tell me. Nothing's wrong, he insisted. I'm fine, just focus on your own stuff, okay? Make sure you graduate, make sure you take care of Mom. Even from inside a detention center, Marcus was still trying to take care of everyone else. The first serious incident happened 6 weeks into his sentence. Marcus was found unconscious in his cell, apparently the victim of an assault by other inmates. He had a concussion, several broken ribs, and injuries that suggested he'd been beaten severely enough to require hospitalization. Who did this to you? I asked when we were finally allowed to visit him in the medical unit. I don't remember, Marcus said, though his eyes told a different story. I must have fallen down some stairs or something. The facility administrators promised a thorough investigation, but Marcus refused to identify his attackers or provide any details about what had happened. He was moved to a different housing unit, supposedly for his own protection, but the damage had already been done. My little brother, who'd once believed that good things happened to good people, was learning that the world could be much crueler than he'd ever imagined. I should have taken the blame, I told him during another visit. This should be me in here, not you. No, Marcus said firmly. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. You're going to graduate, you're going to go to college, and you're going to make something of yourself. That's how you can make this worth it. But how could any of this be worth it? How could my brother's suffering ever be justified by whatever success I might achieve? The second incident happened 3 months later. Marcus was found in the bathroom, unconscious again, this time with what appeared to be drug paraphernalia nearby. The facility doctor said he'd overdosed on something, though toxicology tests were inconclusive about exactly what substance was involved. Marcus doesn't do drugs, I told the counselor assigned to his case. He's never even smoked a cigarette. Someone did this to him. Mr. Johnson, the counselor replied, unfortunately, many young people experiment with substances while in our facility. It's one of the challenges of this environment. He was poisoned, I insisted. Someone forced him to take something, or slipped it to him without his knowledge. That's a very serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support that theory? I didn't have evidence, just the certainty that my brother would never voluntarily put drugs in his body, especially not after seeing what drug-related charges had done to our family. But the facility's investigation concluded that Marcus had obtained and used illegal substances on his own, adding additional charges to his record and extending his sentence. "Why won't you tell them what really happened?" I asked during our next visit. "Because it doesn't matter," Marcus replied, and for the first time since his arrest, he sounded defeated. "They've already decided who I am and what I'm capable of. Fighting it just makes things worse. But you're innocent. You're innocent of the original charges, and you're innocent of this too. Innocent doesn't matter in here," he said quietly. "Survival is what matters, and sometimes survival means accepting blame for things you didn't do." The phone calls became less frequent after that. When Marcus did call, he sounded increasingly distant and disconnected, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. The optimism and warmth that had defined his personality were fading, replaced by a flatness that scared me more than any physical injury could have. "I'm worried about him," Mom said after a particularly brief and impersonal phone call. "He doesn't sound like himself anymore." "What can we do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We wait," she replied. "We hope, and we pray that our boy is strong enough to survive this." But Marcus wasn't surviving. He was disappearing, piece by piece, day by day, until the person calling us from the detention center bore little resemblance to the brother I'd grown up with. The final incident happened on a Tuesday in November, 8 months into Marcus's sentence. I was in calculus class when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me step into the hallway and pick up. "Is this Tyler Johnson?" the voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Dr. Martinez from Jefferson Hospital. I'm calling about your brother Marcus. He's been brought to our emergency department, and his condition is very serious. Your mother is on her way, but I wanted to call you as well." The rest of the conversation was a blur of medical terminology that I barely understood. Heart failure, brain damage, life support. The only thing that registered clearly was the doctor's repeated emphasis that Marcus's condition was critical and that we should prepare for the worst. I left school immediately and drove to the hospital, where I found Mom in the waiting room, crying harder than I'd ever seen her cry. "What happened?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "Another overdose," she sobbed. "But this time, his heart stopped. They got it started again, but he's been without oxygen for too long. They don't think he's going to wake up." We sat in that waiting room for 3 days, taking turns holding Marcus's hand and talking to his unconscious form, hoping that somehow our voices would reach him and bring him back to us. But the machines monitoring his brain activity showed no improvement, and the doctors became increasingly pessimistic about his chances of recovery. "Even if he does wake up," Dr. Martinez explained gently, "the lack of oxygen has caused significant brain damage. He would likely require constant care for the rest of his life." On the 3rd day, Mom made the decision to remove life support. She'd been strong throughout the entire ordeal, but as we watched the nurses turn off the machines keeping Marcus alive, she finally broke down completely. "My baby," she whispered, holding his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped. "My sweet, innocent baby." Marcus died on November 18, 2019, 8 months and 3 days after he'd been sentenced for my crime. He was 14 years old, and according to the official records, he was a young drug offender who'd succumbed to his addiction while in state custody. The truth, that he was an innocent kid who'd died protecting his older brother from the consequences of his own bad choices, died with him. The funeral was small and quiet, attended by family, a few teachers from Marcus's middle school, and some neighbors who remembered him as a polite, helpful kid who'd always looked out for others. None of his friends from the detention center came, partly because they were still incarcerated and partly because Marcus apparently hadn't made any real friends during his time there. "He was too good for this world," Mom said during the service. "Too pure, too kind, too willing to sacrifice for others." I couldn't speak at the funeral. I couldn't find words that would capture who Marcus had been or what he'd meant to our family. More importantly, I couldn't face the assembled mourners knowing that I was responsible for his death, that every person in that room was grieving because of my selfishness and cowardice. After the funeral, I expected to feel relief or closure, or at least the beginning of some kind of healing process. Instead, I felt nothing but an overwhelming emptiness that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. Marcus was gone, and with him went the person I'd been, the family we'd shared, and any possibility of redemption for what I'd done. "You have to keep living," Mom told me a few weeks later, when my grief had turned into a kind of paralysis that made it difficult to get out of bed or focus on anything. "Marcus gave his life so you could have a future. Don't make his sacrifice meaningless." But how could I live normally knowing what I'd cost my family? How could I pursue success and happiness when they'd been built on Marcus's suffering and death? How could I enjoy anything when my little brother would never get the chance to experience adult life, relationships, career achievements, or any of the things he'd given up to protect me? I finished high school, but barely. I went through the motions of attending classes and completing assignments, but my heart wasn't in it. College acceptances came in the spring, including one to a state university that would have made Marcus proud, but I couldn't bring myself to care about academic achievement when it felt like a monument to my brother's sacrifice. He wanted you to succeed, Mom reminded me when I expressed doubt about going to college. That's why he did what he did. You owe it to him to make the most of the opportunity he gave you. So I went to college, but not because I wanted to. I went because I owed it to Marcus, because his death would be even more meaningless if I didn't try to build the life he'd thought was worth saving. I studied business, maintained decent grades, and planned for a career that would allow me to support Mom and maybe help other families in situations like ours. But success felt hollow when it was built on such a foundation. Every achievement was tinged with guilt, every opportunity shadowed by the knowledge of what it had cost. I graduated, got a job at a nonprofit organization that worked with at-risk youth, and tried to channel my guilt into something productive. "You're doing good work," my supervisor told me after I'd been there for 2 years. "The kids you counsel really respond to you. You have a gift for reaching young people who are heading down dangerous paths." I did have that gift, though it came from a dark place. I could recognize the signs of poor decision-making in teenagers because I'd lived through the consequences of my own bad choices. I could speak with authority about the dangers of getting involved with the wrong people because I'd seen firsthand how quickly things could spiral out of control. But I never told the whole truth about why I'd become so passionate about juvenile justice reform. I never explained that my expertise came from watching my innocent brother die for my crimes, that my motivation was pure guilt rather than altruistic concern for struggling youth. "What happened to your brother?" one of the kids I was counseling asked me during a session. "You mention him sometimes, but you never say what happened to him." "He died young," I said, which was true but incomplete. "He made some bad choices that cost him his life." That was the story I told everyone. That Marcus had been a troubled kid who'd gotten involved with drugs and died as a result of his addiction. It was easier than explaining the truth, and it served the same purpose of illustrating how quickly young people could destroy their futures through poor decision-making. But living with that lie, on top of the original lie that had sent Marcus to detention in the first place, was slowly eating away at whatever was left of my soul. I was successfully helping other kids avoid the mistakes that had destroyed my family, but I was doing it while perpetuating the false narrative that had allowed me to escape accountability for Marcus's death. 10 years have passed since that night in March when I decided to make a drug delivery that would cost my brother his life. I'm 27 now, the same age Marcus would have been if he'd lived. I run a successful nonprofit program, I've helped dozens of at-risk youth avoid the juvenile justice system, and I've managed to build a life that looks meaningful and productive from the outside. But I wake up every morning knowing that I'm living a life that should have belonged to my brother. Every day that I'm free, every opportunity I have, every moment of happiness or success I experience, all of it was purchased with Marcus's suffering and death. The tragedy that haunts me isn't just that my brother died young, or even that he died in a detention center while serving time for crimes he didn't commit. The tragedy is that he died believing he was saving me, that his sacrifice would allow me to become someone worthy of the life he was giving up. Marcus believed in a version of me that never existed, a potential future self who would justify the price he paid. And every day that I fail to become that person, every day that I allow guilt and grief to diminish my ability to make a positive impact on the world, I betray his memory all over again. The truth is that there is no redemption for what I did, no amount of good work that will balance the scales or bring Marcus back. There is only the choice to keep trying, to keep working, to keep hoping that somehow, in some small way, I can make his sacrifice mean something more than just another tragic story about a kid who died too young. But late at night, when the work is done and the distractions fade away, I'm left alone with the knowledge that my little brother gave his life to save someone who didn't deserve saving. And that knowledge will follow me for the rest of my days, a constant reminder that some mistakes can never be undone, some losses can never be recovered, and some guilt can never be absolved. Marcus believed I was worth saving. I spend every day trying to prove him right, knowing I never will.